Hi everyone. Yeah, I believe we have everyone here now. So as Cassie mentioned, thank you all for being here for this great alumni panel. My name is Kim, and I'm a rising senior majoring in industrial engineering and management sciences with an interest in pursuing intellectual property law. And so I'll be moderating the conversation today. So we have a great lineup of alumni speakers to share their insights with the group today. And once we hear from them for about like 40 minutes or so, we'll take questions from the audience. If you want to turn on your mic to basically ask questions, then please submit your question via a public chat tab and we will call on you. If you would like me to read the questions out to our panelists, please just send me a private chat. Without further ado, let's start with the introductions. Yeah, so I would love to, can Ms. Mac start with us?
Hi, everybody. I'm glad to. I noticed that there was a little feature that said switch breakout rooms. So maybe it's time for me to see what other career paths I can take. So that was supposed to be a joke. But at any rate, hi, everybody. I am a graduate of Northwestern University, and it seems like just yesterday, but it wasn't. I went on to Harvard Law School straight out of college, which is actually something that not that many people do now. And I think there's good reason to take a little bit of a break. We can talk about that more in a minute. And then after that, I what we call clerked for a federal judge. So I worked for a federal judge and then started my career. And this is unusual too. I started my career at the same law firm I work for now. And I'm not saying that that's how things work. And if you'd asked me when I was at Northwestern whether that would be my career path, I would have told you, what? Are you kidding me? So I am an environmental lawyer. I practice environmental law 100% of the time. I'm also office managing partner of our Dallas office, but I'm also resident in the Boston office. I have clients all over the country and around the world and work on environmental issues for them. And so one of the things that I can tell you about myself is that I just evaluated whether, all along the way, am I happy? Do I like what I'm doing? Sure, yes, I could win the lottery and retire. That would be wonderful, but I actually forgot to play most of the time. So I wasn't doing that. So it's one of the things that I had to remember about practicing law or anything in a career is that don't let other people tell you if you're enjoying it, because a lot of people, for example, will say, oh, you're still a lawyer, or, oh, why didn't you do something different? And it's like, well, I was doing something different. I was evolving in my own career. But likewise, if you're not happy, you need to evaluate why. But again, I'm one of those rare people who has basically done the same thing my whole career. And that has worked for me, and I'm glad to talk more about that when we actually talk, and I'll let other people speak now, but I'm glad to be here with you.
Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction. So we'll move to another guest speaker, Ms. Tang.
Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie Tang. I am an assistant professor of law at Baylor. So actually, I'm also in Texas.
Yeah.
Kind of funny, but
who would have known?
I teach family law and children of the law here, and appellate advocacy. My husband is a career clerk for the magistrate judge. So if you had questions on the practicing attorney to federal clerkship path, which is a little bit a reverse of what Ms. Mack had just said, I can give you perspective on that as well. Prior to moving to Texas, I was a partner at a family law firm in Chicago. So I went straight from Northwestern, straight to law school at University of Illinois, and then straight out of law school, became an associate in a family law firm, switched to a different family law firm where I became partner in year 6 of my practice, and then adjuncted while I was partner at my law firm, and then switched to being a full-time tenure track professor this past year. My husband was working the kind of opposite career path. I was working at a very small firm. He was in a big law firm based in New York City, but in the Chicago office doing intellectual property, Hatch-Waxman Act litigation. So, and then went on to be a career clerk, as I said, for a federal judge here in Texas. So I say here in Texas as I am zooming to you from Chicago, but I live in Texas now, but he had the kind of opposite path. So we have a range of spectrum between large law firm, small law firm, federal clerkship, and professor positions. If you had any questions about any of those four kind of law-related career paths coming out of law school.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I believe that we now learn a little bit about our guest speakers' backgrounds. So we will now move on to the next part of our session, where I have some prepared questions so that we can gain a deeper understanding about our guest speakers' work and their previous experiences. Yeah, so my first question is, what were some of the impactful classes or experiences for you in school that led you to consider and pursue your chosen industry or field? Yeah, we can go into any order, maybe prefer for sure.
Well, I can pick that up. I mean, it's, I was an English and history major. And I just liked learning. And I thought that going into the law would help me learn about all sorts of different things for the rest of my career. So it felt like an intellectual pursuit. And so when you ask me about particular classes, it's less about the individual classes and more about the fact that I was exposed to a lot of different classes. And I think all of you would laugh, right? Or maybe you won't laugh, but I laugh at myself about this. And that is that I just told you English and history, but a lot of what I do every day is now science. And there wasn't really a path towards environmental law when I came out of Northwestern and Harvard. And so now you need more of a science background for that kind, but I was self-taught in it. So I learned it on my own. But I think the bottom line is that for law, and especially in where we are in the 21st century, is that a broad range of classes and understanding is really helpful to the practice of law. But if you at all think that you would be interested in, helping people in making strong arguments, being an advocate, whether that's for corporations or individuals, people who have less than what you have, all of those things combine to make you think that the law might be good for you. I'll hand it over to Stephanie.
So for me, I was a legal studies major at Northwestern, which I think is a relatively new major.
I was going to say, they did not have that then.
Yes. And I will say, of the classes for the legal studies major, the most helpful for me were first the advanced research seminar. So the thesis writing seminar, you were able to pick your own topic, at least at the time. I think that's still the case. And that just gave me some exposure to an area of the law that I was interested in looking at. I wrote my thesis on false light and defamation claims, which is not what I ended up practicing, but it gave me good exposure to reading cases. And that I think was the most important thing, because reading law cases can be very tedious and difficult and challenging as opposed to other kinds of, and very different from other types of reading. And being able to have that exposure to reading the types of analysis in cases, reading the dissenting opinions and seeing those different perspectives was really invaluable to me within my kind of traditional class structure. In addition to that, highly recommend you pursue the Chicago Field Studies programs in terms of practical internship experience in the law. So, and you can get credit, which is great. So I did my field studies at the National Immigrant Justice Center and at Carpel's Legal Aid, which is a local legal aid organization in Chicago. And Carpel specifically, it has a help desk for domestic relations cases in the Daly Center in downtown Chicago. And as an intern, I was responsible for manning that help desk and doing the intake for those clients and meeting those clients and actually having the experience of talking to real life people who are going through these cases and filtering them through the attorneys and being able to sit in and observe the attorneys advise clients in real life situations in domestic relations cases. And that really sparked my passion for domestic relations law in general, and obviously has been my through path through private practice and as a professor now, something I'm really passionate about teaching as well. And that all started from that one internship in the Chicago Field Studies program at Northwestern. So definitely recommend as much as you can kind of getting out there through that practical experience. And Northwestern does offer that ability to do so for credit. So I would definitely take advantage of that, even though I know it can be daunting to have to go down to Chicago, but it's definitely worth the experience.
Yeah, definitely really, really great information here. And I believe that it will help so much for the students to be able to structure the future study plan. So we kind of know a little bit more about our guest speakers kind of like academic experience at Northwestern. So we're gonna move a bit to, to like after they graduate. So I would love to ask our guest speakers is like, can you tell us like about your first job and whether it was exactly what you were looking for?
Stephanie, you want to take that one first?
Sure. My first job was, I guess my first job out of law school was probably not exactly what I was looking for in terms of firm. It was difficult. I was the only associate so it was me and then 5 partners. And so it was difficult in terms of caseload because any work that a partner didn't want to do was allocated to me, which was challenging in terms of figuring out prioritization and how to say no, frankly. And that's, I think, definitely something that you need to learn early on is you want to be able to get a good work product out there, and you need to have the ability to be honest with the partners. I think that's the biggest thing that I learned from that first experience, is how to prioritize and how to make sure that you're not compromising your work product in saying that you want to take on everything, right? I was working hours until 2 or 3 in the morning just to try to say like, I can do all of these cases at the same time for all of these partners. And I, a family law attorney, my caseloads were, each partner had about like 50 to 75 cases at a time. And so I was not churning out the proper work product that I wanted to, especially in my first year, because I was trying to do everything. And I think what I learned from that is being able to, and what I would tell students now, you have to feel comfortable being honest with your employer and saying, here's everything that I have right now. I would really like to work on this project with you or work on another project that you have in the future. But right now, I don't want to take something on if I don't feel like I'm going to be able to produce the work product that is up to the quality that I expect and you expect from me. And I think that being able to have that acknowledgement is going to be a big step in finding that balance and making sure that you're taking care of yourself and making sure that you're producing the quality of work that your partner is expecting, because it's not going to be good if you're just producing a whole bunch of like pardon my language, half-assed responses that when you know that you can do better, but you're kind of taking on too much without being able to be honest about what your capacity is.
So for me, and I want to back up for a second. So it may be that everyone is in legal studies, which is great. But if you're not, don't worry, because you will have plenty of time to learn how to read cases and take a full 3 years of law school that you can. I would recommend if it doesn't appeal to you to do legal studies, don't worry about it, because there'll be plenty of time to know what that's like. Because we do read cases, but actually I haven't read a case in a really long time, just so you know. But that's the nature of being an environmental lawyer. So my first job was with a federal judge. I highly recommend working for a federal judge. And what that entails is that you are the judge's right-hand person, one of, depending on how the office is staffed, it may be in the Article 3, which is the judges who are confirmed by Congress. It can be 2 to 3, maybe even 4 clerks. And they and what you get to do is basically analyze, prepare first drafts of opinions, and the opinions are, if you think of a lawsuit having effectively 2 sides, although there may be more parties than just 2 sides, then there are rulings that have to be made, because a party may submit something that says, I'm entitled to win. I'm entitled to win before we ever get to do anything else. And so that has to be, the arguments have to be understood and analyzed and, backed up. You have to back up and see if the citations are correct, which sounds sort of like you're just checking something, and you're not. You're really analyzing it for whether it makes sense and that it's accurate in context. And that's really exciting. And you're in the courtroom for trials, for if you're at the district court level, for trials, for sentencings, for actual all kinds of hearings. So and it's a very exciting job, one that I highly recommend. And the nice part about that job is that it actually you're very valuable coming out of it. So today, currently, high bonuses are paid for people who are coming out of those judicial clerkships. So not only is it a good job, but it's a commodity as well. And back in my day, it wasn't as, it was highly valued, but they didn't pay for it. Now you're paid very highly for that extra, in part because you're getting government salary to do it. And there are people who say to me, well, aren't you losing a lot of money by doing that, where you could go to a law firm and make more money? And it's not, I mean, obviously I don't subscribe to the dollar for dollar view of the world, and I don't recommend doing that. It's really one of the best jobs you can ever have, regardless of the pay. So, but law firms do tend to make it up to you, and your insight into the courtroom is very valuable at that time. So what the judge thinks about things, how the office operates, what we call the chambers. It's the judge's chambers. So I recommend that job.
Yeah, definitely really great information here, especially we all know the first job can be challenging, as it's like a transition from college to like working life. But yeah, this is really helpful, especially for graduation students for sure. So yeah, so I believe we know a little bit more about your first job out of graduation. Then I guess our next question will be, can you tell us more about your job function today?
I can start. As I said, I'm a professor, so a little bit different than private practice. But I really enjoy having that transition and going from that practice side, from being in private practice to being in academia. So now I take all the lessons I learned from private practice and I create simulations for my students, generally for law school, in family law. So I do a mediation, client intakes, things like that. I think perhaps more relevantly to like private practice, excuse me. I was in family law for 6 years. And as part of the family law practice, as I was mentioning before, very high caseload, so 50 to 75 cases at a given time, but not working on all of those in a given week. But they were all kind of actively going. With that, very busy on a day-to-day schedule in terms of making sure that you kept people straight, frankly, and making sure that you understood the balance between emotion and the law. And I think family law, as opposed to other areas of law in particular, is a great area of law to go into if you enjoy talking to clients and being able to see your individual impact on a person-to-person basis, right? I really enjoyed being able to take my clients from a place where they were generally unhappy, generally were going through a difficult time in their lives, to a place of more peace or resolution. But it was, again, on an individual by individual basis, right? It was not necessarily a large verdict at a particular time, and say for the larger estates, but on a general day, it would be kind of reaching a resolution, negotiating parenting plans, went to court every day. So if you're interested in an area of law where you're in court every day of practice, family law was great for that. I was always in court in multiple cases on a day, and then in depositions or in trial or hearings in the afternoon. And so being able to kind of get that courtroom experience right off the bat in the smaller firm setting, I think was really valuable, as opposed to larger firms where you may need to wait a little bit longer before you kind of get that first chair experience. But it just depends on what you're looking for in terms of the progression, and how much you want to argue in court, frankly. But you're litigating a lot, negotiating a lot, talking to clients a lot, and as opposed to other areas of law, counseling a lot. So trying to draw that line between being a counselor, talking through the emotions and how they relate to the law, and being able to balance and making sure you keep the clients on the path realistically and setting their expectations based on what the statute provided, which I think is really valuable in terms of balancing that private practice, again, work-life balance.
So would you remind me of the question? I'm sorry, Kim.
Yeah. The question is, can you tell us more about your job function today?
Oh, sorry. Okay, my job function today is I've got 100% of my time is office management partner, but really that's supposed to be a joke too, since we don't have 200% of our time. But 100%, let's talk about the 100% that's environmental. So I counsel. The biggest part of my job is doing what we call brownfield redevelopment work, and that is getting historically contaminated, currently underutilized properties cleaned up and put back into beneficial use. That would be things like the West Loop in Chicago. For those of you from or knowledgeable about DC, all the area around the ballpark where the Nats play. If you're from Boston, that would be everything from Cambridge Crossing to the seaport. If you're from Dallas, Trinity Grove, Deep Ellum, from Austin, the Domain, there's all of these areas. And that's actually my first love. I spend a lot of time. It's a combination of, like Stephanie said, counseling, because quite honestly, people sort of panic about environmental issues because we all care about the environment. But the panic is a little bit different than what you might expect from your vantage point. The panic is also about, if I've got major environmental issues, who's going to finance it? Who's going to come? And obviously, I need to be able to do this work and be able to sell this project, or I'm not going to be able to have to be able to do the next thing or put food on the table or any of these things. So there's counseling, there's business, because, if you just think about environmental issues from the purest sense of the world, we all want everything to be perfectly clean. We want it to go back to the way nature intended, but it doesn't have to be that way. This is not, believe me, this is not a political conversation. This is about how these, the nice part about the way the laws intertwine at this point is that there are what we call risk-based cleanups, that for example, if you're living in the middle of Chicago, you're not going to be drinking the groundwater in Chicago. You're going to be getting it from the municipal water supply. You're going to turn on the faucet. So the groundwater doesn't need to be clean enough to drink. And so, for example, in Chicago and surrounding areas, there are deed restrictions on drinking groundwater. What that means is that you can't drink the groundwater. And so, so the point being there that we use the resources available to actually make sure the government's doing the right thing in terms of helping, so that people will want to come in, buy a property, clean it up, put a really cool restaurant or apartment community or, area like River North or something like that, and make it really interesting. And I'm the person who helps with, holding hands, the science, the explaining it to people, making sure that everything goes smoothly so that we can do this redevelopment work. And so that's a big chunk of what I do. And I can work on up to 10, 11, 12 different projects a day on that kind of, but then I also help companies with compliance. So some of the biggest, multinational companies that you've heard of. And so that's kind of my day to day, which is why I'm still at this firm. It's given me this platform to feel like I've made a difference in the world, and I really like it. And then the managing partner stuff is, helping people feel happy in their workplace and making sure that, actually, to be perfectly candid with you, it's not at this firm, but in general, the world is the workplaces in the world or in our country, I should say, are a lot better than they were when I started. And we have a lot to be grateful for. Obviously, there's improvements. No one's going to ever have the best answer to how do I raise kids and work and, all these things. But there's a whole lot more thought put into making the work environment a better place. So those are my jobs.
Yeah, awesome. We would definitely learn a lot, especially a great industry insights from a very impactful and interesting works from our guest speakers today. Yeah, and so I believe we kind of know a lot about the details of the work, especially with your kind of like career transition to your current positions. So next, we would love to know more about the industry in general. So like, what are some trends that you see in your profession, whether it related to the pandemic or not? And what are your organization expectations for working in the office or remotely?
I'll talk from the small firm perspective, I guess. So I had my first son in the pandemic, which was great. It was challenging in terms of navigating. So I'll say, and with the small firm, we didn't have any kind of policies in place. So we were all just kind of, as the partnership was just kind of working to try to figure out policies as we went along. And what we established primarily through talking through other small firm partners in Chicago as well, we prefer that you work in person, but it was like usually right now they're back to 3 to 4 days a week in person. And most of the courts are back in person as well. So a lot of that is because they have to come down for court, and then they're there anyway. So then they go back. to their offices once they're in court. A lot of the courts during the height of the pandemic went to a Zoom option for at least uncontested cases. And that's still kind of kept up across the counties in around Chicago. And so for an uncontested case, you may still have a Zoom call, but otherwise they're primarily back in person for contested cases or trials. And in terms of the kind of work from home culture, or like how to communicate, there's software that we use to communicate, internal messaging, like the equivalent of Teams or Google Chat, and Clio, which is a law firm management or billing software. So you have to account for all your time, so your partners are able to kind of keep you accountable for your time through the billing entries that you bill. So that's primarily, I think, how they track the times that you're not working from the office. But in terms of on the client side, expectations wise, they definitely have a higher expectation of faster communication now, in my experience. So everyone was working from home, so they're just able to have a more ready availability to talk. They'd want to talk virtually, like face to face, as opposed to on the phone. So we would set up a lot of Zoom meetings just to make sure that that could happen and accommodate that accordingly. Virtual mediations, virtual access to services. So in particular, a little bit more emphasis on, if there's nothing locally in Chicago for a service, can you find a client service that may be available in Texas or somewhere else that can offer a better rate or a faster service that is a comparable quality. And so my job became a lot more networking outside of Chicago for innovative techniques or innovative services to provide to our clients through those virtual means. And a lot of those, again, were in terms of our associates and our law clerks. At the end of the day, we're also asking them, okay, we can't find a therapist that has this particular niche in Chicago that has availability right now. Can you find someone outside of the Chicago area that may be able to do teletherapy, for example, that can again provide therapy at the same caliber? And so a lot of our associates or law clerks became tasked with things like that in order to find and be a little bit more creative for our law firm in that way, to reach clients, to help clients have some more virtual access. I think in addition to that, obviously a lot more automation with forums and ChatGPT and all of that within the last few years too, especially in the family law space. People already thought that they could get divorced by themselves, and now with ChatGPT, they just ask ChatGPT to like formulate a form for them. And so that was difficult in terms of, I guess, navigating the legal advice with that regard too, because they would say like, I talked to AI and they said that I could do this thing, or I talked to my friend and they said I could do this thing. And so that, again, is in terms of navigating post-pandemic, has been a technological issue that we've kind of seen across the board in terms of advice. There's a Illinois appellate law opinion where someone was watching Suits, like the TV show, and got an idea to file a petition to vacate from Suits, and the appellate court goes through this whole analysis about how that's not a valid grounds for motion to vacate in Illinois, which should not have to be a subject to an appellate opinion, but it was. But that all just to say, like, even though that sounds very joking, like it is the reality where people are kind of getting this information, and particularly since the pandemic, in a more like virtual media format, and being able to, as a lawyer, navigate and talk through the clients in a way that you're still relying on the law, of what are the underlying law actually says, without saying, well, you can't like compare me to a TV show, because that clients don't like that when you say things like that. But the reality is that's basically what you were saying, but being able to, again, see where they're coming from, articulate it in a very respectful and professional way.
Awesome. Yeah, that is like really, really interesting, especially you mentioned about ChatGPT and all of that stuff. Yeah, for sure. How about Miss Mac? Do you have
So
any?
is the question just what are the expectations of people coming back into the office and that sort of thing? I just want to make sure I hit what
Yeah,
you want me to
yeah.
hit.
So there are like two main questions here, which is like, what is the trends that you see in your profession, whether it's related to the pandemic or not? And the other one will be like, kind of like, what is the organization expectation for working in the office versus like remotely?
Yeah, so I mean, Chat GPT is, I mean, AI is huge. So you definitely, I'm sure you're hearing this from everyone. You want to choose a profession that your job's not going to, or you want to choose the next thing you do. Don't think of your, I mean, despite what I've done, because I would never have guessed I did it, I would have done it. But you know, you need to think of what's next, not, oh God, is this what I'm going to do for the next 15 years? And don't even ask me how many years it's been since I've been at. But my point is, think about what's next, but also think about if you're going to put your eggs in a basket, make sure it's a basket that's not going to get usurped by, I mean, the job isn't going to exist because of AI. I don't think that's going to be the case with law. It's certainly not going to be the case with sophisticated areas of law. But and there are differences, you know, because they're between sophisticated and non or unsophisticated areas of law. But so that is changing our profession very fast. So you, I mean, I'm sure that comes as no surprise to anybody. In terms of like the more immediate about what what we're doing, the expectations, you know, obviously I don't need to tell any of you on the phone what the pandemic did. And I'm sure most of the students on the phone were even more disruptive than I was because of the time in your life that it occurred. Although I have kids who just graduated from college in 22. So, you know, not to, I mean, I saw what it was doing. In terms of getting people back into the office, we want people back in the office. It's not mandatory, but before the pandemic, we weren't in the office 100% of the time. And on any given day, it was maybe 80% because I might be in Boston, I might be in San Francisco. I'm just giving an example. Any given lawyer might be doing whatever, including meeting the refrigerator repair person or, you know, running home to take care of the dog. But in general, we do find that the real life human contact versus this, which this is better than not doing this. But imagine if we could all sit together and then go and have, whether it's a cocktail or a snack or whatever together. Imagine how, you know, the formality is less, we get to know each other a little bit better. You can see the color of my eyes and the crazy color of my glasses. It just, there's a human element that we know got lost, and to the detriment of not like of people, not to people like me who are established, but to the newer people. So I really encourage you, whatever profession you choose and whatever options you're given, show up more rather than less. Now, I mean, there are some professions and offices that are literally like, we can't accommodate you if you come in on Tuesday because we're office sharing and all that kind of stuff. I'm not telling you to bust that, but I am telling you, if they say, come in 3 days a week, come in 4. The human contact, even if there are not many other people in, you don't know what you're going to hear, how you're going to learn something. Somebody's going to pull you in and say, why don't you listen to this call? I'd love to work with you, but out of sight is out of mind. And I will add that some of my best friends, and including my husband, I met my husband at work. But you don't know what you're missing when you're sitting at home. You're just sitting at home working. But they're just like in school, there's a whole social element of going to and from classes and doing, you know, all kinds of things that if you're just sitting on a Zoom, completely missed. Yes, you may be able to throw a load of laundry in or go to the refrigerator, but there's something that's lost. So I encourage you, now that we're 3.5 years in, to actually think positively about the human experience versus the virtual experience. I saw there was a chat, but I didn't see what it was.
Yeah, I would just like asking students to like,
Oh.
feel free to send their questions and stuff.
Okay, I just didn't
Yeah.
know if there was.
Yeah, definitely really, really great information here, and very interesting, especially with the current adoption of AI and ChatGPT and all of that stuff. Yeah, so yeah, I have a follow-up questions on that. So what kind of like area of law that you think will be less affected by this like AI revolutions? And I guess like what part of that specialization, like what part of the job that, will be less affected by AI?
Elizabeth, do you want to go first on this one?
Sure. I think anything that's sophisticated that requires a human touch. I think basic contract writing, just simple contracts, leases, very, simple leases, those kinds of things are going to be replaced by AI. I think anything where you can be doing things that the same thing wasn't done yesterday is going to be a good fit for, not being usurped by AI. And what does that mean? Sophisticated transactional work, sophisticated trial work, because, you need trial lawyers to stand up and make arguments. Mine isn't going to get usurped by AI. Stephanie, I would think that some aspects of brief writing and family law would get usurped, because it's like the statute or code says you have to meet these 3 elements, and there it is. But the hand holding, the counseling, those sorts of things will not. So put another way, something that's too easy, not that machines can't do stuff that's really hard, but if it's too easy, you can bank on the fact that somebody's figuring out how to have a machine do it, and we won't be doing it. I don't know, Stephanie, you're in the academic environment, and people may be really studying and talking about that. So I was actually thinking you would pick this one up even stronger, because the academics are trying to figure out where we're heading.
Yeah, I think that all of your insights are great in terms of sophistication and like client interaction, particularly. It's interesting. Right now, I'm working on a form set for divorce forms, and I think like that automation, as Elizabeth mentioned, will be very much like formulaic. If you can meet these statutory requirements, you can kind of meet which AI or form can kind of help you fill out. For a very simplistic divorce, it's likely that that's going to be sufficient, or potentially usurp the role of family law attorneys in a more simplistic sense. But what it's not is, and I think in terms of looking for professions within the law, ones that do require the communication with human communication, right? AI can kind of give you statistics on like what's your likelihood of success in a particular claim, maybe, but they're not going to be able to tell you like, I've appeared in front of this particular judge 100 times. You are not going to be successful on this claim, even though the statute says this. Like, I get it. It says that. This judge does not care. And that's not going to be kind of accounted for in terms of that experience. I did a lot of high net worth divorces, so they were a little bit more sophisticated also in terms of negotiation. So another thing that I don't think that AI is going to be able to quite replicate is in terms of like your negotiation power in terms of, again, like knowing your opposing the opposing party and the opposing counsel's kind of personality, and what will be the most effective negotiating tactic for them. Do they respond well to firm letters where you're demanding kind of production of discovery or setting specific timelines? Or do they respond better to, okay, I'm going to give them a phone call, I'm going to talk to them and kind of person to person and see if I can negotiate in a better sense through that. And I think, again, that's knowing the person on the other side. Family law, I could tell you, we had a very small community, so I can kind of tell you the difference between getting a petition from one lawyer to another lawyer, completely different strategies on a case, depending on how it was going to play out, because I knew, depending on my knowledge of the personality of that lawyer, what was actually going to be effective or a worthwhile step or not for that client to take. Like, is it worth it to try to negotiate with them or just file the petition? Because this lawyer is not going to listen. It does not matter how many phone calls I try to make or how reasonable I'm trying to be. And you can only control your side of your actions and your side of the case. So I think, like, in terms of trying to find areas of law, that's also something that's been emphasized in terms of what can we make sure that we're bringing to the table as important, and our important skills that are not able to be replaced by AI within our communications with clients, as opposed to necessarily only relying upon our knowledge of the underlying statute. And I think, like, even in my lesson planning, I mentioned this earlier, that's part of why I'm focusing a lot on these simulation type of exercises instead, because I think that that's what's going to help students actually get that edge at the end of the day, is being able to say, like, I have a better touch with client negotiation, communication, and kind of reading the other side than AI will. And that's going to be my benefit to you, and the value I'm bringing to you as your lawyer. So that's my 2 cents on that.
So
Yeah.
can I pick up these questions? Is that okay from the chat?
Yes, for sure. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so Oliver Goldman asked us, what is the one thing you wish you knew when you were 20? So that's a fantastic question. And the thing that there are several things that I think about that way. One is, I remember being very, very determined. Again, the world is different now, that I needed to, once I figured out, I thought I wanted to go to law school. It was like, take the LSAT, do well, take the LSAT, go straight to law school, go straight. Now I know there's a lot of encouragement to do that differently, but I definitely do encourage you. I'm like, for me, I had this whole deal of like, if I don't do this, then that will, so the stress of just, you think you have this one path that you're on. I would encourage you to step back, take some time. If you're going to take time off, take 2 years off at least. And the reason why is, and people probably have told you this a million times, so I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, but if you only take 1 year off, you're starting to need to take the, study for the LSAT, right after graduation. You haven't taken time off, so take time. And I'm not advocating don't work or something. I'm just saying, give yourself some breathing room. Your 20s are a time when you're figuring out who you are. And that's only been clear to me with the passage of time. And there will be plenty of time to do all these other things. So there is no rush. So I wish I'm sure somebody did explain that to me, but I wish I had taken it more to heart, that there's no rush. You only have to figure out what's next, not what your whole life is going to look like, because I guarantee it won't look the way you think it will. And so it's really less about, I wish I'd taken certain things more to heart, and you don't have to be stressed about graduating. Obviously it's exciting to graduate, but about I had this wonderful education and I owe it to my parents and I owe it to, and if these people they're going to med school and it's okay. And that's a super important thing to know right now. And there's another, the STEM background would be environmental and IP for sure. So go ahead.
Yeah, so in terms of the first question from Oliver, I would echo what Elizabeth said, but also I think be kind to your fellow classmates and don't underestimate the power of connection in college. I think that I stayed in Chicago for law school, went to Champaign for law school, and then came back to Chicago to practice. And I cannot tell you how many random classmates of mine came through the woodwork to refer me clients after I graduated from law school based on knowing that what I was doing in family law, and how many invaluable connections I had through real estate, through therapists. And I was able to like refer people back to people who I was in student organizations with at Northwestern and build my network that way to take advantage of that. Even moving to Texas, I've been able to find, obviously, Ms. Mac aside, people in Texas that were willing to help and reach out because of that Northwestern connection, but because I was able to like be involved in events like this or be willing to kind of put myself out there in a positive way. So just be careful in terms, and like in the other sense, people who I've had negative interactions with, some of them applied to my law firm and things like that. You never know how it kind of comes back. I obviously recuse myself from those interviews, but I still just generally like people will kind of remember you through your reputation. So just make sure that you're not kind of dismissing someone, or just be kind to people just generally now. Don't feel like, oh, I know what kind of person they're going to be, and they're not going to be helpful to me later on in life. You never know. You don't know who's going to be helpful to you later in life. So don't burn bridges where it's not necessary to do so. In terms of the stems, as Ms. Mack said, sorry, I keep switching back and forth between calling you Elizabeth and Ms. Mack.
Please call me Elizabeth, everyone.
So as I mentioned at the beginning of my intro, my husband was an intellectual property lawyer. So if you have any questions about he was a molecular and cell biology major at Berkeley before going to law school. He took 4 years off to work in a science lab, realizing that he didn't want to work with mice, and then went to work at a law firm after graduating, doing patent litigation. So if you ever want to connect with him, I'm happy to connect you with him as well, instead of me just talking about the things that he did in his job. But generally knowing that there's different paths, whether it's kind of working as corporate counsel or of counsel for a lab, or in-house counsel for a lab or healthcare company, or working as a law clerk like he's doing, or doing a lot of patent cases on his docket, or working for a patent law firm in private practice. I think there's a lot of kind of variation there as well. But the patent firms generally are on the larger side. So there are some boutiques, but a lot of the patent practice, unlike family law, is within kind of a larger firm setting. So you'll see that, a lot of the larger firms, like where Elizabeth works, has like an IP litigation department, for example. And so you'll probably be within that kind of setting as opposed to this smaller firm setting that I'm describing.
Yeah, definitely. I believe we kind of get through all the questions. So thank you so much for logging on today. And please join me in thanking our alumni speakers for sharing such great insights with the group today. And I believe we'll be heading back to the main Zoom where the program planners will share the final closing remarks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.